All right, so today we're diving into a topic that's sparked, well, let's just say it's sparked a lot of debate over the years. Minor marriage in Islam. And, we always want to get to the heart of what the Quran actually says, right?
Absolutely.
So we're checking out this book, Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Quran. Dr. Abla Hasan wrote it, and she really jumps right into the deep end on this one.
Yeah, what I find so fascinating about her approach is that she kind of just cuts through all the noise,
Yeah, great.
all the back and forth, and takes us straight to the Quran. It's like she's saying, hold on, everyone. Before we get into all the interpretations and opinions, let's just see what the actual text says.
It's such a good point because I feel like you always hear people justifying minor marriage by pulling out these specific verses.
Well, 100%.
So what is she saying about those?
That's exactly what Dr. Hasan tackles head on in this book. She's looking at those exact verses, but she's kind of pulling out a magnifying glass.
Oh, wow.
She is dissecting the language, the grammar, all the little details to really unlock what's going on beneath the surface.
So walk me through it. What kind of verses are we talking about here, and how is she reinterpreting them?
Okay, so one example that really jumped out was verse 65.4. Now, this one deals with waiting periods for women after a divorce, what's known as Iddah. This verse mentions a waiting period for those who have not yet menstruated.
Okay.
And traditionally, some scholars have pointed to this as like, see, the Quran condones child marriage. It's talking about young girls here.
Right. Yeah, I can see how someone might read it that way at first glance.
Exactly. But Dr. Hasan is like, hold on, not so fast. We need to look at the linguistics here. So the verse uses the word lam for negation. And in Arabic, that implies something temporary, a state that could change. If it was talking about girls who never menstruate,
Okay.
like from a biological standpoint, they never would. It would use a completely different word. Law.
So it's like the difference between saying, I haven't eaten yet today versus I never eat.
You got it. One tiny word makes all the difference. And what Dr. Hasan points out is that this subtle difference in the wording, it actually points to women who haven't menstruated yet within a specific time frame. Like, for example, women experiencing menopause. It completely changes the meaning.
It's like a plot twist. You think you're reading it one way and then you realize there's a whole other layer here.
It really highlights how important context is and just how easy it is to misinterpret something, especially when you're talking about these ancient texts that have been debated for centuries.
Right.
If you don't understand the nuances of the language.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much gets lost in translation over time, right?
100%.
Like what we might be reading today is not necessarily what was intended however many hundreds of years ago.
It's a great point, and it actually ties into another argument that Dr. Hasan addresses in the book,
Okay.
which is the whole idea that the Quran links marriage to reaching a certain level of maturity.
Right.
But she digs into that too.
Interesting. So how does she approach that aspect?
So she points to verses like 4.6. This one talks about orphans and like when they're ready to handle their inheritance, right?
Yeah.
And it uses this phrase, age of marriage, almost like a benchmark.
Interesting.
Like, okay, if someone's reached the age of marriage, it's assumed they can also make sound judgments about their money.
That's a really interesting connection.
Right. So it's not just about physical maturity, but mental and emotional maturity too.
Yeah.
Being able to handle those big decisions.
It's just huge. I mean, we have legal ages for all sorts of things, right? Driving, voting, even signing a contract. And it's all based on this idea that you need a certain level of maturity to handle those responsibilities.
Right. Because those are big deals.
Exactly.
And marriage, arguably one of the biggest decisions anyone makes in their lifetime. So it makes sense that the Quran would emphasize like sound judgment, real maturity, not just physical development.
Totally. It's like, are we really saying a young teenager is equipped to handle the complexities of a lifelong commitment? It makes you think.
Right. And it gets to the heart of what marriage represents. The Quran often uses this word mithaq to describe it, which translates more to like covenant or solemn agreement.
Oh, okay.
This isn't just a casual, okay, sure, let's do this kind of thing.
Right. It's way more serious.
It implies this deep understanding of the commitment being made.
Like signing a contract. You got to know what you're getting into. You wouldn't just let a kid sign a legally binding document without explaining all the implications, right?
Exactly. And the Quran talks a lot about things like mutual consent.
Right.
Understanding being crucial for marriage. It even talks about marriage as a partnership built on love, mercy, tranquility.
Those are big, complex emotions.
You said it. It takes emotional intelligence, maturity to really navigate those things. It makes that whole sound judgment point from Dr. Hasan even more important.
Totally. And it's so fascinating to me how, like, societal norms and even just interpretations of these religious texts change so much over time.
100%.
Like, what might have been considered, totally normal and acceptable however many centuries ago might raise some eyebrows today.
It's such an important point, and it's why I think these discussions are so vital.
Right.
Where we're actually questioning, analyzing, and like really trying to understand the text in a modern context.
Because context matters so much.
It does. And that's something I really appreciate about Dr. Hasan's work. She's encouraging us to like ask the tough questions, challenge the status quo and engage in these really, respectful but critical conversations about these topics.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about blindly accepting what we're told, right? It's about seeking knowledge, understanding for ourselves.
100%. It's about grappling with these complex issues, considering different viewpoints, and then coming to like your own informed conclusions.
Which is what makes this deep dive so compelling. It's like we're not here to give you a definitive answer, but we want to equip you with the knowledge and tools to really think critically about this issue.
Yes, exactly. And hopefully spark your curiosity to go and explore these questions further, discuss them with other people.
Keep the conversation going. I love that. And speaking of exploring further, we were talking about Ida, those waiting periods for women after like a divorce or death of a spouse.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just a pregnancy test.
Oh, so you got a good memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just about that at all. Think of it more like it's actually this really empowering period for women.
Okay.
They have specific rights, protections during that time.
Like what?
Like the right to stay in their home, receive financial support from their husband, even after the divorce is final.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's like this built-in safety net. It's there to make sure women are taken care of, they have time to get back on their feet. And it actually goes back to Dr. Hasan's whole argument about the Qur'an really prioritizing maturity and responsibility in marriage.
Right.
It's not this like casual arrangement. It's a serious commitment with real-world implications, especially for women.
It all ties together, doesn't it? Like when you start to look at it through the lens of empowering women and prioritizing their well-being, it paints a very different picture than one where, young girls are deemed ready for marriage just because they've hit puberty.
Yeah, it's like we're uncovering this whole other layer of consideration for women that goes way deeper than like just a surface level reading of the text,
100%. It makes you realize like how much depth there is to these verses when you really take the time to understand like the context, the nuances, all of it.
It's about looking beyond just like the letter of the law and understanding the spirit of it, right?
Right.
Absolutely. And to circle back to your initial question about what Dr. Hasan ultimately says about the Qur'an and minor marriage, she argues that while some interpretations might allow for it, when you really take a closer look, especially at the overall message of the Qur'an, it seems to suggest a very, very different perspective.
So for our listeners, like everyone who's been on this deep dive with us, what would you say is like the key takeaway here? What do you hope that they walk away with?
Honestly, I hope they come away feeling empowered.
Yeah.
Empowered to question, to really dig deep into these topics and to never stop seeking a greater understanding of what the Qur'an is teaching. Dr. Hasan's work, it's a good reminder that interpretations, they can change, they can evolve as we learn more, as we discover more. It's more about like actively engaging with these texts rather than just, accepting one interpretation as the be all and end all.
Yeah, it's like she's giving everyone permission to not have all the answers, but to be okay with that. Like the learning never stops.
Exactly. And to be open-minded, even when you're approaching these big, complex, centuries-old debates, approach them with curiosity. Be open to different perspectives.
I love that. That's such a good note to end on, I think. It's a good reminder. Learning is a lifelong thing and it evolves.
It does.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought-provoking question, hopefully, to keep that process going. If the Qur'an aimed to address this directly, the concept of minor marriage, how could it have done so in a way that really leaves no room for misinterpretation? Like even across like different cultures, different time periods.
That's a good question.
Just something to think about.
It really is.
But yeah, with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been awesome.